I don't get wide open, but as far as what I'm doing with these baits, certain times of year dictates what I'm going to start with. We're going to be starting in the wintertime. You know, obviously, we're here, it's cold, miserable. I'm going to have a jig tied on always. That's just something I'm going to have tied on. I don't know if it's because of Oklahoma thing, but I've grown up with a jig in my hand my whole life. And normally in the wintertime, I'm going to be starting out with a football jig. You know, War Eagle, we've come out with a new football jig. It's got a little different head style to it, which makes a difference of how it comes to the rocks. The only thing I'm going to change about this jig is the profile I'm going to give it. You know, wintertime, you're looking at, all I can think of a jig, I think of crawdads. That's it. You know, something scooting along the bottom, something that's an easy meal for those fish. I'm not going to have a super big jig. That's just something I've never been a big fan of. I mean, you know, the mop jig, stuff like that, that was a big phase for a while. It probably still is. And I've got some in my box. But I love the 1/2 ounce and 3/4 because the one thing about a jig in the wintertime, what I don't want to do is lose contact with the bottom. I want this thing to stay planted on the bottom at all times. I don't want it hopping. I don't want it swinging it up. That's just something. They're cold. They're wanting a crawfish. I've never seen a crawfish go nuts off the bottom, but you know, with those rattle traps, they have the same colors and they think it's a crawfish, I guess. But that time of year, I want it to be on the bottom. When I'm working this bait, I'm not even pulling my rod up and down, not a 10 and 12. I'm actually probably going to have my rod at like a 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock because I don't want it lifted. I want it on the bottom. I want it stirring up a little bit of sediment or whatever it's doing. The few trailers that I use on that jig, I don't want a ton of action, but I'm going to have a spine crawl. The legs don't give too much action. It still gets you somewhat of a fall, and they're still pretty small, and it gives enough action to it, but it's not too big of a profile bait. If I am feeling like I'm around a little bit bigger fish, and maybe I've got a little bit better water temperature, you know, not 42 degrees, maybe if I'm getting closer to 50 in the wintertime, I'm going to go ahead and jump up to the Christie crawl. It's definitely, you can tell it's got a lot bigger legs on it. They're going to kick quite a bit more, but you're still not getting an overall ta-da flying everywhere, you know. So I'm keeping it simple with that. Where I'm looking at, especially in the wintertime, you know, you hear me talk about the first third of the creek, you know, coming out from the main lake. And you're also, I mean, wintertime, you're going to look in your main lake, you know, your deeper haunts that them fish are going to be looking at. My depth range that time of year, obviously depending on your water clarity. If you got water clarity of, you know, over 2 feet, I'm going to be looking from 12 to out to 20 foot, 22 at the most for me. That's my deal. I don't like looking deeper than that because that's just not my thing. Look at those bluff ends, you know, any of those hard spots out toward the main lake. Because when it's cold, most of your fish are not going to be way back in the back. I mean, there's some instances, different lakes, but as far as our type of reservoirs, most of your fish are going to be toward the main lake and on those outside bluff ends. Not the bluff ends on the inside, the bluff ends coming to the outside. But as far as tackle, I'm a 20-pound test line guy. Doesn't matter if I'm fishing 12 footer or I'm fishing 20. If I need to get down there a little bit faster, I'll bump up to a 3/4 ounce jig. You know, that's just me. I just soon raise my weight as I would drop my line size. Because I like to, when I hit them, I like to go ahead and smack them in the mouth and let them know what's up. As you start transitioning to your springtime, I'm not going to have the football jig out as much. You know, these fish are starting to think about getting on the bed, doing their spawning thing, and really not saying they're getting away from crawfish because they haven't, but I'm not going to be out there throwing a football jig in 20 foot of water anymore. I'm going to start getting up to areas where you're looking at the middle third to the back of these pockets, you know, and I'm going to start looking at these flatter pockets. And when I start transitioning to that, I've got to have my own near and dear woolly bug tied on. I mean, that was, obviously that was my winning bait. And so it's just something that's very special to me on that aspect. And I really like the way the bait falls. You can change the way that bait falls, not only by your line size, but also with your weight size. And just like I talked earlier about your drop shot weights, you know, a quarter, you can make it fall like a 5/16 by dropping your line size. I do the same thing with my weights on my woolly bug. So if I'm wanting a slower fall, but I've got wind, and you know, it's harder to fish with a 1/4 ounce weight. Well, I'm going to jump up to that 5/16, but I'm also liable to move up from, say I'm throwing 16 on a 1/4, I'm going to be throwing 20 on a 5/16, and I'm still getting that rate of fall that I'm looking for. Another thing is I'm also going to have the Christie critter tied on. You know, it's a brush hog style bait. I like it. It's got a little bigger body to it. I'm going to have this. As bad as I don't like to throw it anymore, is old Carolina rig. I know down in Texas it's a big thing. I mean, it seems like it. Everybody's got one on. That is my favorite Carolina rig bait there is. I've always had it. That's been my deal. I like the way the legs move. It's got a bigger profile. It's stirring up sediment. Looks like something's chasing your weight around. And that's been a major thing. I will put that on a Texas rig also. You know, whether I'm flipping laydowns, flipping trees, you know, even isolated rocks, I'll still have that Texas rig tied on. And another one, that's another big thing that time of year, I'm going to have the dinger tied on. This catches them everywhere, especially in the spring. There's nothing better than, well, not to say better because it's slower and it's not for me, is wacky rigging this and skipping it under docks. I've caught a lot of fish. When we were at the Classic at Hartwell, I had a deal. I was throwing a Scottsboro swim bait early in the morning on the herring fish. I'd go catch me a limit of that, and this was my go-to after that. I ended up catching I think I had one that went almost 6 on day 3. Caught numerous 2.5 to 3.5, 4 pounders on it on all the docks. I mean, that was the deal. It was, I mean, a lot of us were doing it. I know we were after the Classic, they have a top 6, and we were all in the room, and it was like they spread us all out like it was an ESPN seminar type deal, asking us what are we all throwing. It was like this. I mean, every one of us talked about a wacky rig the whole time, and all the top 6 had it, except Christie, and he was busy throwing a jig, which would have been the fun way to catch them. But you know, that was my thing. You can you can Texas rig this also. I never go above a 1/4 ounce weight on this. A lot of times I want to be having like a 1/16 on it if I can get away with it. I just want just enough to where it'll get nose down to the bottom. It's one of my favorite baits other than a woolly bug on a bed. When them fish are actually on a bed, that is one of my favorite ways to catch them because, one, you can bite it down and get it down to where it's even a 4-inch. So when those fish get it, they already got your hook. You know, that was a key thing. And